Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 237, a special 220th Yutas Kislev anniversary edition. Being that this Tuesday will be Yutas Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, so will be the major focus, Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. We're doing Chassidus Applied. My Life Chassidus Applied, obviously Yutas Kislev is the Rosh Hashanah of everything related to Chassidus, including this program. This program is dedicated in honor of the marriage of Mendel Jacobson and Sarita Felig on the night and eve of Yutas Kislev this week, and in merit of their parents, Yerachmiel and Rivka Leah Jacobson, and Tzvi Meir and Shoshana Felig, and grandparents Rabbi Tzalel, Olav Shalom and Fegi Shetichya Jacobson, Rabbi Shlomo Olav Shalom and Shoshana Shetichya Kaplan, Mr. Yosef Mordechai Olav Shalom and Miriam Tichya Shetichya Felig, and Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak and Rivka Olav Shalom Hecht, dedicated by Yerachmiel and Rivka Leah Jacobson. So let's begin Yutas Kislev. Yutas Kislev just coming right here. Tomorrow night begins Yutas Kislev. It all extends into Yutas Chof Kislev, because the full Geula of the Alter Rebbe extended to the extra hours into the day of the 20th Kislev, with all the details involved. So there's much to say. We've talked about this a number of times, and I'll cross-reference to episodes 91, and other episodes that I've talked about. I don't have them all marked. I apologize. Okay, so with that said, Yutas Kislev Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, as we know, because as the Rebbe Rashab says, that on this day began the Iker Inyan of Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza. What is Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza? These are the words Mashiach used when the Baal Shem Tov asked him. Baal Shem Tov went up Rosh Hashanah Tov Kuf Zayin, Rosh Hashanah, to Gan Eden, to the Heichel of Mashiach, and he asked him, Emasai Kosima, when will you come? And he responded, Kishe Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza. It's actually based on a verse in Mishlei, that when your well springs will spread outward. And the Rebbe Rashab, Teira Sholem, the Sichos says that the Iker of Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza began in Yutas Kislev after the Alter Rebbe left Petersburg. Petersburg is Petersburg, where he sat in prison for 53 days, which correspond to the 53 chapters in Tanya. And as it's known, the arrest and liberation were not just physical in the sense that it was somebody that informed on him and the government arrested him, but it was also in heaven a question whether the Alter Rebbe was doing the correct thing in spreading Chassidus to everybody in a way that can be intelligently understood, even to people who are not necessarily on the highest levels. Up till that point, even with the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, it was taught selectively, and it was taught in much more in the brief. The Alter Rebbe was beginning to explain it with examples, making it very accessible. What was the challenge? Because these inner secrets, it's like going into the Holy of Holies and not being ready to enter there. And other explanations given as well, because the power of what Chassidus can accomplish, pre-Moshiach, in bringing the Geula, you can imagine all the forces in opposition stood up to resist it. So there was the imprisonment, but then the liberation was a vindication that yes, the time has come to spread Chassidus in this fashion, which is essentially the process of bringing the Geula, because when Mashiach comes, will be Teirosah Shel Mashiach, will be Pnimis HaTeirah Chassidus. Mala Oretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Liyam Chasim, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God, as the waters cover the sea, as Yeshaya writes. And the words of the Rambam, Lo Yi'eser Kol Ha'elam El Ladasas Hashem Balvad. The entire business of the world will be nothing but to know God. So the knowing of God in the direct way through the inner dimension of Torah, as Chassidus explains it, the Seichel of Chabad, that we can understand it intelligently, began in full-blown fashion after Petersburg, after Petersburg, after the release from prison. As it's known, the story that the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid visited the Alter Rebbe in prison, and he asked them, what should I do? I'll be released, what should I do? They said, not only should you continue, not only should you not stop, not only should you continue, but you should continue with even more intensity. And that's what the Alter Rebbe did. And we can actually see the distinction that the Maimonim that he said before, even that was relatively more than earlier generations. But the Maimonim that he began saying after he came out of prison was far more elaborate relative to the Alter Rebbe. And of course, continued to be elaborated upon by the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Rabbeim, all the way to our Rebbe, in the 7th generation. So what we have with Chassidus, Zeh Yem Tchilas Masecha, famous letter that the Rebbe Rashab wrote, what you have in Rosh Kislev is not just a memory of the sad events that were quite frightening at the time, but a celebration of the Geula. The Geula of the Alter Rebbe, which represents a Geula wasn't just a personal redemption, but a redemption for all Chassidim, for the entire world. As the Alter Rebbe writes in his famous letter to Rav Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, that the nations, the Sari HaMelucha, the ministers of the government, meaning non-Jewish ministers, also recognize Higdal V'Hifli, the great miracle and the wonder that happened here. And the Rebbe explains in a number of sikhs because Chassidus and the liberation of Chassidus and its spreading was not just about Chassidim and Eden, it actually affects the entire world because it heightened the whole spiritual consciousness and the whole spiritual standard that affects everyone. Because as I said, the world as well. So its impact is not just on a select few, but really global and universal. And that's why it's called Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. Rosh Hashanah, like Rosh Hashanah literally is the Reish of the year, the head of the year, not just the beginning of the year. It encompasses everything that's going to come throughout the year. So Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, the Rosh Hashanah is that it encompasses the power to the liberation and the dissemination and the proliferation of Chassidus throughout the year. That began 220 years ago, and each year only increased, as I mentioned, each generation and each year only increasing. And its message to us is very straightforward. Whatever Chassidus is, this is the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. And what is Chassidus? Chassidus is the inner dimension of Torah that's meant to, just like a body needs a soul to give it life and energy and passion and integration and internal pnimius, vitality. The same thing in Torah. There's Chitzenis Torah. You could say Gufa de Torah, like the Zohar says, the body of Torah. That's the mechanics of Torah. It's the same Torah. The mechanics of Torah is what you're supposed to do. What do you do on Shabbos? What are you not supposed to do? All the mitzvah sesa, mitzvah leses, and all the Torah Shabbat Peh, and the halachas of all the generations. But the neshama of Torah, neshmasa daraisa, that's pre-Moshiach Torah. The why, what it accomplishes, how it affects us, impacts us. And it's like the kavanah behind the guf. The body and the mechanics of Torah is like the body of Torah. This is the soul of Torah, the vitality. Now, of course, you can learn nigla and do Allah and do it with a passion. But when you learn Ava V'yira and the fundamental mitzvahs, the 6 big mitzvahs that one is supposed to perform all the time. So yes, the halachas tell you what to do, but to learn in a way to understand and relate to godliness and to relate to what the divine, what God wants of us in a personal way, like a partnership with God, in understanding how our soul works and how our soul is part of the process, not just mechanical activity, not just mitzvah sanoshim ulamoda, which is like by rote. That's where pre-Moshiach Torah adds that whole chayis. And we know when a person does something with a passion and with a vitality, they do it far differently, quantitatively and qualitatively, than when they don't have that, God forbid. So pre-Moshiach Torah adds that dimension. It also has a dimension of relevance, personal relevance. You could do a mitzvah, Kabbalah sale, and no, this is the mitzvah you have to do. And do it faithfully, perfectly. But when you know that it's relevant to you, Korav Elecha Dover Me'ed, using the Pasuk in Chumash, Nitzavim, that the Alter Rebbe states right on the Sharblat, on the cover page of Tanya. What does he say? He says that this book came to explain how, Eichu Korav Me'ed, how the Torah mitzvah is relevant to us. Beficha belvavcha la'asesei, in our speaking, in our hearts, and in our actions. And that's the whole Tanya. And the Tanya, we know, is the Torah Shebiksav of Chassidus, the written Torah of Chassidus, and the rest of Chassidus is like the Torah Shabbat Peh of Tanya. So all of Chassidus is coming to teach the relevance. So someone will say to you, Shabbos, beautiful mitzvah. What is its relevance to my life? So Chassidus will explain, on Shabbos the worlds get elevated, you get elevated. There are spiritual doors that open up, opportunities. That's why we avoid as much as possible material activity, the 39 melachos, in order to be in that spiritual state. The same thing with what is the Yom Tevim, what is Pesach, Yetzias Mitzrayim. Not just we remember that the Jews left Egypt, but you also are experiencing it right now. B'chol der v'der, a person has to, in every generation and every day, a person has to visualize and envision that they're leaving what? Mitzarim u'gvulim. The inhibitions, the limits, the constraints, anything that keeps us trapped. So it all adds a dimension that's more than just commemorating and not just a technical mitzvah, but also one that's filled with personal relevance, psychological, emotional, practical, and spiritual relevance to our lives. And frankly, this is the theme that I speak about week after week after week in all the different dimensions, addressing the different questions and applying it to our lives. So Rosh Kislev is the wellspring, you can say, it's the reservoir, the engine room where it all begins. On this Tuesday, the 220th anniversary of when the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. So we honor, we celebrate it, we thank for it, we thank God for the opening up those well springs in ways that we can relate to it, in ways that, with examples that relate to our personal lives. Not just an esoteric teaching, which is difficult to relate to because of its abstract nature. But here you can find examples from our flesh, I behold God, which is Chassidus, permeating our personal lives and showing how our personal lives are really a channel, a moshel, an example, a channel to channel the divine within every fiber of our existence. So Yutas Kislev, of course, carries tremendous potency for each one of us, and particularly in a program like this, which is focused completely on doing that, on demonstrating the relevance of Torah, the relevance of Chassidus to our personal lives, and applying it in every aspect of life as I do, to the best of my ability, week after week after week. So we honor this day, and of course, on a day like this, there's so many different directives, which can't go through all of them, but essentially it's a day of learning Chassidus, and saying Lashon HaTeva Tikasev V'Chasem B'Teres HaChassidus, Limud HaChassidus, B'Darkei HaChassidus, the learning and behaving in that way. And the Alter Rebbe was asked, what is a chassid? And he said, a chassid overlooks his own good for the benefit of another. And they asked, what's the proof? And he brought the Gemara, that it says, when you cut your nails, so a Rasha just throws them out. A tzaddik buries them, because it could be a sakana for someone who's in a sensitive situation, so he buries them. And a chassid serfon, he burns them. See, burning your own nails has a shtickle sakana because it's part of who you are, part of your body. It was once part of your body. So that's why the tzaddik buries them. But when you bury, they still can be dug up. Serfa means he's ready to compromise himself, potentially, that no one else should be affected. That was the Alter Rebbe's raya. So Chassidus is not just the learning of it and understanding, and even the addition of the vitality, but the acting in a way that's beyond the letter of the law, not because you're forced to, because you want to. Because you feel that deep love. When you love someone, you don't just do the minimum, you do the maximum. And a chassid goes all the way in that sense. And you see it translated today in the generation of the Rebbe, how he took that idea and applied it into Chassidus, into shlichus, I should say. That people going out in the farthest outskirts all over the world, out of their own comfort zone, in order to help others. So Yutas Kislev is a day to recommit to both the study and the passion and the joy that comes from Chassidus, and the internalization of God's will in our lives, and also the actions of how we treat others and how we behave with a deeper sensitivity and a higher level of refinement. I saw just recently, there's many things, but just for Vusa de Milsa, I was looking at Kuntur Samayan the other day, and he says that when you learn Nigla the Torah, you connect to the Chachma of the Eibishter. It's Chachma Shel Kodesh Baruch Hu. You learn Chassidus, he says, it makes the ganze Mensch edeler. You become an edeler person, a more refined person. Why? Because you're learning about something that's not about you. You're learning about something, he says, even though Chassidus talks about matters that are not tangible, and we only have Yediyas HaMitzias, we only know about it, that it exists, we don't know it's muhus. Things in Gashmias, in this world, you can know more because you can observe it and relate to it and so on. These things, we only know about them in a way only that it exists without knowing its real personality. And yet, precisely because it's not our comfort zone, it makes you a more refined person, because it takes you out of yourself and you absorb a higher presence, a divine presence in your life. In Kuntas Eitz HaChaim, the Rebbe Rashab elaborates on what Chassidus has accomplished in the context of the Yeshiva Temchet Mimim, in addition to what Torah Nigla the Torah accomplishes. And there's many, many sikhs, Maimonim, that talk about this at length. Okay. I usually have cross-referencing, but for some reason my cross-referencing didn't appear, so I apologize. But we will manage. Good. Now, since it's also Pasha Vayeishev, I'll just say one word in Vayeishev. Vayeishev Yaakov. This is Yaakov returning to Eretz Yisrael. After Vayetze, he left Be'er Sheva to go build a family, and he accomplished that. Ufaratz the Yom became of Tzafein V'Negba, as God promised him, and he built his family. He's coming now back after the confrontation with Esav, which thank God worked out, and he's able to come back peacefully to Vayeishev Yaakov, the land of his parents, and he settles. Of course, as soon as he settles, new tzara starts. Because Yaakov Leisher B'Shalva, Yaakov wanted to sit in peace. Kovtzalav Rugza Shal Yosef. And what consumed him, what Kovtzalav means, it jumped on him, like now, he had another tzara. So after all the challenges he had, Yosef is taken away from him as this pasha continues. So there are many hints and connections to Yutas Kislev. First of all, the Etzaminyan, the Alter Rebbe, wanted to sit b'shalva peacefully and teach Chassidus, and he was building a community, and was building a force that would transform Judaism in every dimension. And you have to have a rugze, a certain challenge, the challenge only to bring out something even deeper. As the Rebbe Rashab says, that even though it's difficult to say, you could say that Peterburg, again, the imprisonment of the Alter Rebbe, was like an olive that produces oil when you press it. So even though Yosef selling into slavery was ostensibly a negative, and in many ways was for 22 years torn away from his father, but at the end of the day, that's what led the Eden to Mitzrayim. And though there was golus Mitzrayim would build them into a powerful nation, and they would then receive the Torah. And all through this Yerida, it starts for Vayeishev Hurid Mitzrayim, and Vayeishev going down to Mitzrayim starts the descent. But the descent is only in order to bring a greater ascent. It's exactly the story of Yutas Kislev in pre-Moshiach Torah. There, Matan Torah was primarily the Nigla the Torah, even though by Matan Torah all Kol Torah, the entire Torah was given. But the Alter Rebbe, you have the same story. So the negative only leading to something deeper by squeezing the oil, the pressing the olive, and producing even more powerful oil, the Chassidus that came out from the Alter Rebbe, especially after he came out of prison in Tovkuf Nun Tes. There are many other hints, but I decided I'll just share that one, and we'll continue on now to, since we're focusing on Chassidus, and Chassidus as a instrument to bring the Geula Mashiach, I decided, I'll focus on a bunch of Mashiach-related questions that came in over the months, and collected many of them together, and I'll address them one by one in this context. Remember, Yefutza Nesecha Chutza is what the Baal Shem Tov heard from the Mashiach himself, is the way Geula will come. The Alter Rebbe is Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus, there's Rosh Hashanah of Yefutza Nesecha Chutza, the primary Yefutza Nesecha Chutza. So all of Chassidus revelation that begins on this Rosh Hashanah, with Alter Rebbe and all the subsequent generations, all is what? Is coming to bring the Geula. What does that mean? It's not a Zgula. It's not like, okay, the Mashiach says, you do one thing, I'll reward you and I'll come. No, because when we learn Chassidus, and we live by Chassidus, that's living Mashiachdik. That's learning Mashiachdik. That's a Mashiach mindset, as opposed to a golus mindset. It's a Mashiach way of living. That what? That you're living, as the Alter Rebbe says in chapter 37 in Tanya. What is Yemesa Mashiach? It's Gili Alakuz Be'elam Azagashmi, revealing godliness in this world. When you learn halacha, it's also godliness, but not necessarily you see the full revelation. You're following God's guidelines and saying, this is what you shall do, this is what you shouldn't do. Eat kosher, do not eat other types of foods. What Chassidus comes is actually reveals the lakus in it, that you see the divine power that it brings into the universe. And when that's revealed, Siba Mesu, cause and effect. That's why Maseinu, Vavid Deseinu, the Alter Rebbe says, our actions, our behavior, is directly, totally, that is dependent, the Geula. So Mashiach's statement is a cause and effect. So all of Chassidus is coming to bring the Gula and Mashiach. It's not a side thing, it's not a peripheral thing, it's direct. And it's actually, one is a revelation of the other. So in a way you can say, every time you do a mitzvah, and you do it with a primis, not just by rote, you're building a building block. I will say even if you do a mitzvah without the primis, you're doing the building block. But how much more so when you do it with that passion and excitement and relevance, then what you're doing is you're permeating your life with a higher divine perspective. That is a taste of Mashiach. The more you do it, the more the building blocks are built. And then they accumulate, and we have the Mashiach Klali, the Messianic age, as described in Chassidus and the Rambam and all the different Svarim. Based on the Psukim in Yeshaya, Molei, as the Rambam says, the Svarim Nanach are filled with references and direct description of what that world will be like. So the first question someone's asking, what can we do to help speed up Mashiach's coming? This is something we've talked about many, many times. And I really am sorry I don't have the cross, I don't know what happened here exactly. Okay, so be it. We talked about it many, many times, and frankly, it's easy to find if you go, let me use this as an opportunity to make the announcement that you can find all cross-references to previous episodes, all their archives, at meaningfullife.com/mylife. All you got to do is search if you want a topic, and you'll find it by that. And I mention it because some people have asked me again and again. It's all timestamped, but you have to go to the YouTube video, the original YouTube video, which is linked to on our site. You go to the YouTube and you'll see how it's timestamped, meaning you can go straight to the section that this topic is that is addressing this topic. You don't have to go through the entire thing. So if you type in Mashiach, you'll find all the references in previous episodes. So what can we do to bring? So first of all, let me just answer as I just said. What you can do to bring Mashiach is to do as much as you can, even more than you have, in the learning of Chassidus and the actions, behaving accordingly. In the words of the Rebbe, that we are standing at the threshold and we have to learn Lil Midinyan and Moshiach, which puts your consciousness in a place that you don't think with a golus mentality, but you think in a guladik mentality. And then you have to act on it. That means you have to look around and see wherever you can see, envision what would the world look like when Mashiach comes? What would your life look like? And that's like putting the aleph of Geula into the Geula. It's not talking about turning the world upside down and some type of suspension of nature necessarily. Not necessarily. It's talking about looking at the world and the life we have, but how do you bring the divine into it? In a very deliberate and direct way. So that's a specific way to do it, as I just mentioned. But in this, one of the letters I received, one of them that came in, I want to read, because they gave a person was following up a discussion I had on a previous episode. So one person writes, "Hi Rabbi Jacobson, I want to share with you today some ideas I thought of in connection with 28th of Nisan, Chav Ches Nisan, of course, in the year Tov Nun Aleph. That would be almost 20 Nun Aleph, now is Ayin Tes, 28 years ago, will be a little less than 28 years ago, where the Rebbe spoke a passionate talk that I did whatever I can, now do what you can. Screaming Ad Mosai, getting out of the golus Pnimi, getting together and strategizing what to do, how to do. So the person is writing in connection with 28 years, and I want to share with you some ideas I thought of on how to bring Mashiach. It's not global or revolutionary ideas, rather it's more on a personal level. Right. Idea number one, Ahavas Yisrael. I think we need to increase in Ahavas Yisrael at a practical level. We need to firstly be kind to our immediate family and be friendly and say hello to our neighbors, to those that stand next to us in shul, and to those that sit next to us at a farbringen, etc. This may sound simple and very elementary level of Ahavas Yisrael, but these days it's not simple at all. I can sympathize with a person that wrote to you a letter recently about people not saying hello in the neighborhood. Yes, I read that back then. So let me just comment before I go to the next idea. Ahavas Yisrael, the Rebbe himself makes this a major force bringing the Geula, and writes in letters that if we had Ahavas Yisrael, there'd be less machlekes. We already had the Geula a long time ago. And again, it's not a Zgula. A Zgula means it's not some just disconnected reward that we get. We do one thing, you get something else. No. The reason for the destruction of the temple was sinas chinam, baseless hatred. So when you eliminate that and you replace it with baseless love, you're directly countering the forces that brought the destruction, which was divisiveness. So unity is the tikkun, is the repair for divisiveness, is the antidote. So of course I second what you're saying. Idea number two, praying for Mashiach. I think everyone should say at least one chapter of Tehillim every day, dedicated specifically to asking Hashem to take us out of golus and send us Mashiach. Just like we ask for our personal needs, we need to plead for Mashiach as well. And this is directly connected with the Sikha of Chav Ches Nissen, where the Rebbe said if we cried out Ad Mosai, earnestly, Mashiach would have already come. Ad Mosai means, until when do we have to wait? Idea number three, studying Tehillim. Speaking of saying Tehillim, it comes to mind a sikh I recently came across. It may be Ba'alei Chetov Shemem Hei, unedited. The Rebbe says there that like no one studied Rambam before the Takana, the same way no one learns Tehillim, I'll just add. I think in general in the Torah world, only Gemara is considered learning Torah. However, in reality, Tanakh, Mishnayos, Seder Kochim, and Taris, Medrash Rabbah, etc. is obviously all part of Torah, which I think is unfortunately underlearned. Idea number four. Learning in Yoni Gula Mashiach, a very practical way to implement this directive would be to study something daily from the Sefer Megillah L'Geula. There's a Sefer that both in Hebrew and English, which has short vignettes from the Rebbe, which would take about 5 minutes to learn. I try to learn it daily. Another very interesting Sefer, which I think is not so popular, is Netzach Yisrael from the Maharal of Prague. The whole Sefer is on the theme of Mashiach. Idea number five, tzedakah. I believe that in the Sikh of Sazim, it said the Tafshinun Aleph, 5751, the Rebbe said to give tzedakah with a specific intention to bring Mashiach. I'll add a suggestion. I think everyone should give at least 5 cents daily with this intention. Idea number six, I think we need to bring back more Chassidic Verbringens in our communities. I think it could be arranged in different languages according to the needs of the community and for all our Nash and Tamimim, not just for special interest groups. Idea number seven, I'll conclude with something I recently heard from Rebbe, Shalom Mordechai Sheyichir Rabashkin. Just like we need to have betachin for our personal needs, betachin is trust in God, we need to have betachin that Hashem will send us Mashiach very soon. I'll just add, if someone tells us Mashiach is coming tomorrow morning, our reaction will usually be to believe, unfortunately, that there is 99% chance he won't come, and 1% chance he will come. When in reality, according to what the Rebbe taught us, we should believe the opposite. I just want to say one more thing. I have heard some people saying that the Rebbe said Mashiach is coming very soon, and in reality, it's over 27 years from Chav Ches Nissen, and Mashiach still hasn't come. Does that mean very soon? In my opinion, the answer to this question is that is a good question, and Mashiach will come, he will answer the question. But from our part of Chassidim, we have to strengthen our amunah and betachin, our faith and trust, in the Rebbe's words that Mashiach is coming very soon, kipshutei, literally, like it says in the pasuk, Vayaminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe Avdei. They trust, they believed in God, and Moses is servant. P.S. I hope you can share this with your audience. My last couple of letters took you 3-4 months to read. This, I think, is even longer, frankly. It seems that you don't like long letters, so why am I writing you this letter? The answer is because I was zeichet to be by the Sikh of Chav Ches Nissen, and to put it the way I heard it from you many years ago, way before you started this program, the Rebbe didn't allow us to be complacent. So I hope you can read this one quicker. Thanks, Hatzlacha Rabba, Mashiach now. Okay, so I didn't remain a Baal Chev, I ultimately read it. Now I want to just say this for the audience. I specifically read it word for word because obviously we have the Rebbe's directives. So what's the point of adding one's own? Because I'm very impressed and I'm flattered that I can have the honor to share it. Very impressed and very inspired actually, because this is what each one of us should be doing. Applying our minds to figure out how. Yes, there's the directives that Rebbe gave us directly, but that itself can be added to, not added, God forbid, replaced, but added like tzedakah. What does tzedakah mean practically? Once a day, 5 times a day. The Rebbe always gave directives and wanted us to then find ways to apply it to our personal lives and to those around us. Different circumstances require different emphasis. So I really encourage anyone out there, if you send me suggestions, I will make it public and publicize it so everyone can hear. And everyone has to choose and decide. There's not a directive. Directives come from the Rebbe. Directives come from Torah directly. But they're definitely excellent suggestions and very much consistent with the Rebbe's directives to us. So that's exactly why I decided to read it. Why I took time, everything in its time. And I'm not going to give excuses. There's just a lot of questions that come in. It's very hard to determine what's a priority. Obviously, Mashiach is a priority, but frankly, everything we talk about ultimately is about becoming better people and bringing the Gula and Mashiach. So thank you for that. And I hope you don't give up on me, and feel free to continue to write. Next question in this vein. Avodas habirurim. Again, something I've talked about a number of times. What did the Rebbe mean when he said that avodas habirurim has concluded? This time avodas habirurim. Shegeendig avodas habirurim. How can the Rebbe say in this time avodas habirurim, if we have finished avodas habirurim, then how can we justify involvement with material things? Also, if we finish that work, what is that work now? And how do we relate to all those Maimorim, many of the Rebbe himself, who speak about the importance of birurim? So I'll just give you briefly, though I believe I've talked about this at length. Everybody's open to give their discussion explanation, but the Rebbe did say it, and didn't just say it as a blessing, but said it as a matter of fact, as a mitzias. What is birurim? Let's make it clear what birurim is before we continue to discuss when it's finished. First, we have to know what it is. So birurim literally means separations, or clarity, if you wish. Birur, clarity. In halacha, it's separating the shaft from the dross, from the main fruit, or the main wheat. It's birur. That's why birur on Shabbos, you're not allowed to separate something from another thing. Because separation. But generally, separation is a good thing. Not as a malach on Shabbos, obviously. It's a good thing because it's clarity. When something's snowballed and confusing, it's not clear. So it's birur is clarity. But birur also comes with another word. Tikkun or zichuch. To repair, to refine. So what are we referring to? So in the words of Kabbalah, on the pasuk Varuach Elokim merachefes al pnei hamayim, the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. So the word merachefes is very interesting. Says that Izal, the merachefes is the letters rapach mes. Merachefes, a different order, rapach mes. The 288 sparks that died. What do I mean by died? Shviras HaKeon, the shattering of the containers, shattered. Think of the script or the narrative of existence is all very clear, but then someone takes the narrative, the blueprint, and tears it up into pieces and scatters it all over the world. That's what happened. And that's why we don't have clarity. What is right to do, what is wrong? Good things are mixed with negative things. So our world is birur hanetzutzes, is to clarify and find these broken shards, these broken pieces, and put the pieces together again and see the purpose for which it was created. The food you eat, the work you do, whatever it is you're involved in, can become devoid, God forbid, klipas nega, or worse, shalosh klipas atmeis, busy pursuing its own interests, not understanding it's really part of a bigger plan. So the birur hanetzutzes is essentially the 288 sparks that we refine throughout all the years from the time that when that shattering took place. In Mitzrayim it says, Erev Rav Olei Mohem, the Erev Rav, Erev is what? The Erev Rav is Reish Beis. So Reish Beis, that Izal says, Kabbalah explains, is 202 of the 288 sparks they elevated in Mitzrayim. And only 86 left. Alter Rebbe explains in Torah and Vayeishev actually, this week's Parsha, that in 210 years in golus Mitzrayim, they refined to 202 sparks and elevated them in the right way. And the rest of thousands of years of golus, only 86. So he explains why. The Shamas Klali is they had more power, they covered, and they were able to, or the 86 sparks that we have are harder sparks to refine, and we have less manpower to refine, meaning we have less spiritual strength to do so. But when we finish those 86, that's called this time avodas habirurim. There will be a point where it's finished, and the Rebbe told us that point arrived. Because Vifl is the shir. It's not an endless journey. It's 288 sparks, which of course, as the Alter Rebbe explains, breaks down into much more than 288. That's 288 general sparks. Here's not the place to go into all the details of this, and I believe I did discuss this at length. But suffice it to say that when you say finished, it means that the main work of that clarity and refinement has taken place. So then the question is, you're asking a question, we still the material world, because we need to recognize that. You know that story, the famous story, it's not a joke, that 15 years after World War II, they found a Japanese soldier in some Pacific island, 1962, and he had this rusty rifle, and he was still thought the war was on. The mentality, when we live for thousands of years in a golus mentality, we still think we're fighting a battle. Now there is technically a battle with Yetzer Hara, but the Rebbe is saying the forces of evil have been weaned away from them. They don't necessarily have that power anymore. Their psychological power still is exerted on us. So someone will tell you the gula, but you're not in the mood, or you're not in the mentality, the mindset. Like many people say, it's time to party. You say, I'm not in the mood for it. That means the party is ready, but you're not in the mood. And as the Rebbe explains in a famous letter, Chuvas habirurim, when he explains Geula B'tchis HaMesim, he says, there's a tkufa where there's the battle between good and evil. And then the battle ends, there's still evil in the world. There's still materialism and selfishness in the world. But it doesn't have a sheer power of evil like an Amalek power, an Amalek of Sitra Achre, of the negative. So we have to recognize that it's coming to the end of their power, and now we have to not allow them to have psychological power over us and see things through the Rebbe's eyes. That means opening your eyes and living a guladik way, and then that psychological hold it has on us will dissipate. That's one explanation that I suggest. By all means, you can give other explanations, but it's consistent. So we have work to be done because we need to open our eyes. We need to become aware. So birur, the actual birur, can be finished, meaning the actual work of the separation. But we now need to recognize that we've finished it. And we have to live by that. And recognize that it's not more the battle, it's basically only the absence of good. That the enemy right now is not a force, but it's only the absence of awareness, the absence of good. The absence, ignorance, is very different than a person who's someone who's a force, a counter, an enemy, an adversary that is directly challenging you. So more to say on the topic, but let's suffice with that. Next question. Will we be able to converse with God after Mashiach comes? Will there be a time during the Messianic era where God will reveal himself to us in our physical world and we can sit down with him one-on-one and have a conversation and ask questions? So first of all, you can do that even now. This is what's called prayer, tefillah. You're speaking to God. The fact that you don't see him, the fact that you don't touch him, doesn't mean he doesn't see you. Doesn't mean you're not speaking to him. So real avodah is that. Even when learning, kol ha-kedah b'teira, kol ha-shena v'kedah, when you learn Torah, God responds. But the response is not like another human response, it's the way God responds. And if you're sensitive enough, hopefully you'll feel something. Now when Mashiach comes, the Alter Rebbe brings right away in Perek Lamed Vav from the Psukim, there will no longer be a shield, a kanaf, a cloth, or a garment, a shirt or garment that will block your merecha, your teacher. Which means, Bisman Hazeh, in our time, there are the veils and the curtains and the tzimtzum and concealments that we don't allow us to see God. But then we'll see the merecha, we'll see our teacher. Ayin ba'ayin yiro, and the Alter Rebbe brings a few more psukim. V'niglik fred Hashem v'ro kol basar yardo. We will see kol basar, the Rebbe emphasized, not just einei basar, not just the eyes of flesh. Flesh itself will perceive godliness. But you have to remember that it doesn't necessarily mean the way you think it means. The perception will be exactly as you perceive things now with your eyes. So yes, it'll be a lot easier to have a conversation with God. I don't know if we'll sit down with you and just to have a shoot the breeze type of thing, quote unquote. But whatever we're able to do now, we'll be able to do in far more intense and powerful way then. Okay. Next question. These are all Geula related questions. And I'll do one more, and then we will go to another question. Okay, just checking things out here. Yeah, good. Again, this is all consistent with it being a Yud Tes Kislev week, and a Yud Tes Kislev focus on Geula and so on. So, this person writes, well, this question is, first let's sum it up. After Mashiach comes, how will we understand all the Torah verses and references that address a pre-Moshiach golus world? So here's the specific way the person writes the question. I was teaching Tanya Perek 27, A really fascinating chapter, and while learning it, I was bothered by a question. The Alter Rebbe's main message to the Beinoni is, you were not created to be a tzaddik, accept the life God designed for you and embrace the challenge joyfully. A tzaddik does not have a battle. His Yetzer Hara has been destroyed. But a Beinoni does have the battle. Accept it, because that's what God designed for you, and embrace it. My question is, how are we to learn this Perek post Tavshin Nun Aleph of 1991? Amongst the many revolutionary statements and revelations we received that year from the Rebbe said on Shabbos Pashas Emer, Sefer HaSichos, Volume 2, page 532, Section 9, Sif Tes, the Aved is quoting, the Aved of a Yid is not only Sur Merah, to stay away from evil, refraining from any wrongdoings, thus fulfilling his promise, I will not be a Rasha, but also to be a tzaddik, to hit tzaddik. For although Tanya states that not everyone merits and has the choice to be a tzaddik, but through the godly power of atzmus that is in the body of a Jew, and we may say that after the refinement that the Jewish nation has been through, presently every Jew can obtain the highest levels up until even being a tzaddik, in the most revealed way, the way it will be when Mashiach comes. Direct quote. Now, truth to be said, from my understanding of the message of the Perek, the chapter in Tanya, the above-mentioned statement of the Rebbe does not change the message. Depression is still not an excuse, for the Alter Rebbe clearly said that maybe you'll create to fight this battle your whole life. Stress on the maybe. Because if you are meant to be a tzaddik, then you will, as long as you do not do your job, and you work your way up. Because if you are meant to be a tzaddik, then you will, as long as you do your job and you work your way up. However, I do feel that the statement of the Rebbe, amongst many others, give me and others I encounter, I wouldn't call it depression, but somewhat of a ... Where are we? Where's the Mashiach world the Rebbe is talking about? Where are we holding in all the areas that the Rebbe demands of us? I can go on, but I hope my general point is understood. Please advise. Thank you. P.S. Another thing that causes me feeling not sure what to call it is that the impression I got from many mashpim, and I've listened to many different shiurim on Tanya, is that 1991 changed nothing in the way they teach this Perek topic. I don't blame them, because they were never taught this by their mashpim, and not necessarily do they really understand the Rebbe's message. It's hard, but it was said to us, for us. It was edited by the Rebbe for publication in the Allgemein, and geared to all its readers worldwide and world over. We must break our heads and figure it out. If you have a way to explain this, please do, and if you don't, please look into it. For as stated, we need to figure out the Rebbe's final message to us in the last moments of golus. Thank you. Thanks again. Is golus now? Okay, very good question. And the truth is, it's a broader question, because if you really think about it, it's not just the Tanya. And what about all the psukim in Chumash? All the psukim in Chumash that talk to us about things about our Yetzer Hara and about a situation that's a golus situation. And when Mashiach comes, what will happen to all those psukim? And how do we read them? So the question is a broader one. But I'll start with the Tanya and then I'll broaden it out and make a few key points. Point number one, the Tanya will be nitzchi even in the time of Mashiach. It's not going to be put aside because it's no longer Beinoni. Because firstly, relatively speaking, all of us have all three levels within us. Vayeishev Tavshin Nun, the Rebbe said that the mere fact that Alter Rebbe speaks about tzaddik Beinoni Rasha means we have all three within us. The nefesh halikiyah by itself is a tzaddik essentially. It's only because there's also a nefesh abamis. That's like a Rasha. Rasha v'tevle. And then as they coming together is why we have the challenges. So when Mashiach comes, and the Yetzer Hara at some point they'll shech the Yetzer Hara. But even before that stage, there's no question that all of us will elevate to a higher level, and tzaddikim will be even higher than that. Because Yelchem Mechayel al Chayel, we always can climb higher and higher, and relative to our lower level. So the concept of Beinoni will still exist even after there's no more war with the Yetzer Hara. What will then be the meaning of the battle of the Yetzer Hara? As I said, that same question applies to every time the Yetzer Hara is mentioned in one way or another in Torah. And I'm going to address that in a few minutes. So that's number one that we have to remember. Number two, when the Rebbe said we're on the verge or on the threshold of Geula, and we now have the power not just al tehei rasha, but also to be a tzaddik, because after everything we've gone through, the refinement, as I just elaborated, the birur, yes, there's no question that accumulatively, we, not because necessarily we did the greatest Aveda, but we have all the schar and all the, I would say more than reward. We have all the cumulative power that all the previous generations and their Mesiras Nefesh accomplished, so we are fundamentally in a far more refined state collectively. We still have to do our part and fight our battles, but we are midgets standing on the shoulders of giants. So the Rebbe is saying, therefore we have that power that comes to us from all the people who did Aveda and all the work and efforts they make, that we have that situation that the refinement is there. And when the refinement, which is basically the situation of the Gula. So when you learn Tanya Taki, you have to acknowledge and add the Rebbe's addition that this battles that we're talking about, we are now at another stage in that. But the Alter Rebbe's words are nitzchi, whatever you read it. And as I said, it's relative, even in a state where that refinement is there, there's still an element, there's a beini within us, because we all could be even more better. Even by a tzaddik we say chet melosh and chsaron. A sin is like not as good as it could be. So you could explain the Alter Rebbe as a beini that you literally have a battle between the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, or the battle can be between good and better. And you're not yet on that highest level. That's how I would explain it. Now regarding the entire picture, how do we look at things in the Torah? So for example, the classic question, I spoke about this in episode 196. Zohar asks a question, a very basic question. The Torah talks about death. Adam ki yom es ba'el. In the beginning of Bereshit it says death will only come as a result of them eating from the tree of knowledge. Since apayim shana Torah kod milah. So basically the Torah talking about death essentially compelled them to eat from the tree. They never had free will. They would have to eat because it says about death. The Zohar's answer is a bit cryptic. So there's a maimer from this in the Rebbe Rashab in Ateres, actually 100 years from 100 years ago. Shabbos Pasha Chukas in Tofrei Shayin Tes, and he brings three answers. The gist of it is that there's another way that you could teach Misa. Misa doesn't necessarily mean the painful death. Misa can be a transition to another level. And that was the free will that they had. Had they not eaten from the tree of knowledge, it would have been Misa, it would have been, look, we have to shed one layer of skin to assume another layer of skin, a form of bittul. Man de nofel medarge ikre mes. Someone that falls on the level is not as high as he could be, that's called Misa. Or, God forbid, that they actually sinned, then their Misa is the way we understand it, a true severing of body and soul for the period of time. Even Chet Eitzadas itself would be interpreted in a more spiritual way if you're talking the Ruchnisdik way. And that will also be Nitzchi. It's not like we're going to just learn the parts of Torah that are no longer talking about the negative. Those negatives can be seen as a negative in a real way like they manifested, or they can be seen as a negative in the sense of not a negative thing, but a energy that is not complete and something that can be improved upon. Just like Yitzias Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim can be seen as an actual country that enslaved the Jewish people, or Mitzrayim can be seen as the archetype of all forms of oppression and inhibition and psychological and emotional blocks and so on. So it all comes down to that you can interpret every part of Torah in a different way, and when the Asad Love will interpret it all in the Ruchnisdik way, like the Alter Rebbe explains in Simon Chavav in Ageres HaKedesh, that it will be then the Yachid Yichudim Elyenim. So everything we learned today about Nezikin and Teverah and all that the Gemara talks about will then be understood in context of the higher spiritual levels that either are in I would say conflict with each other, but have their different forces and how they interact with each other. So everything in Torah can be explained on that higher level. Much more can be said on this, but let's stop with that. And now, as far as the mashpiyim and everyone, how we learn it, yes, it would be very good to be able to infuse everything we learn in Chassidus with an additional component that the Rebbe said, that all that we've learned, we are now at the threshold. And the Veda, we still have to know all those teachings, but we can understand them much more in a compelling way, that everything the Baal Shem Tov heard from Mashiach, everything taught us by the Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, are now coming to realization. And it's up to us, to the Makabeh Patish, to do that final push. Yes, so even when we learn Tanya and all that, it should definitely be learned through Geula Dika eyes, as much as possible that we can achieve. Okay. Next question. Why don't revealed miracles happen today as they did in earlier generations? Thousands of years ago. If you want to say open miracles don't happen today so that we can have free choice, etc., then why didn't those who saw the splitting of the Red Sea need free choice? So the question is asked directly in a mimer from the Alter Rebbe called Ma Yofa Pamayich, Tovkuf Samach Gimel, printed in Derech Mitzvah on the Hesafis, page 176a, and also printed some variations and additions in Eratera Shira Shirim, on that pasuk, volume 2, page 593. What he briefly says is the following, and I'll just read what he says. I'll translate. He explains that the Elikus, divinity, which of course manifests in a miracle, and frankly in everything that exists, can come to us directly or filtered through veils, through concealments, through garments, and so on. And all the garments used in the different psukim and verses refer, like when you say a nal is a shoe is made out of leather. It's much thicker than, for example, a shirt that may be made out of wool or cotton or silk or linen. So these garments reflect different levels of veils. With the thicker ones, like a shoe, because you're walking on the ground, and the ground has sharp objects and could be more destructive, so you need to have a thicker garment to protect your foot. Ma'yofa pamayich b'nalayim, the shoe. Whereas a shirt or other garments that are on the higher parts of the bodies are far more transparent and far lighter and conceal less. So he says the following. Understanding that will explain, he says, this is the reason that the earlier generations was they were found, they were miracles. And now now we don't see miracles. And it's not that common that there should be a real miracle, an open miracle that you see that completely suspends nature. Now miracles are much more concealed in natural causes. Okay, so he says why? Because the neshamas of the earlier generations, their garments were dakim b'yeser. They were very subtle, like levushat tzemer or pishton, garments of tzemer, of wool, of pishton on the body, on silk. Why? Because these neshamas came from higher worlds, pre-Moshiach worlds, and they were just more refined souls. And therefore, they reflect more the upper part of the body, where the garments are subtler garments. That's why they lived in a time where, from time to time, it was appropriate that a Gilead would come without veils, and they would see these open miracles through these refined or subtle garments. Amnam achshav, however, now in the ikvus in the Mashiach, ikvus Mashiach means the heel of Mashiach, ikvus heel, like the foot, and the foot itself, the bottom of the foot. That's the neshamas that come from akfayim. They don't come from the higher parts of the body. They come from the akfayim, from the heels of the Shekhinah. So their garments are gasim ma'ed, are very thick, like the leather of a shoe, and that covers up completely the shoe to protect it. That's why the Eira Leki, the divine Eira, is much more concealed, is very concealed in the laws of nature, in the natural flow. So if there's miracles, it'll be far more concealed from our view. And that's why it's not that common to see a Gilead and a Nes Nifla. That's what he says. Interestingly, in the Maimer and Shir Shirim that I mentioned, he says the same gist of it, a little different words, but he says, look in Gemara in Brachos, chapter 3, the page Chof Amid Aleph. So the question is asked, why there were miracles in earlier generations? And there's talking compared to the Zman HaShas, compared to the generation of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Der HaMidbar, and the earlier generations. So there the answer is because they were Meser Nefesh on Kiddush Hashem, and we're not Meser Nefesh. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, he reconciles it with this explanation, because that means the neshamas were higher than the neshamas of regel, of the leg. That's why they had more bittul and mesiras nefesh. So he reconciles the Gemara with this. Okay, so that deals with that. Let us now go to, I have a few follow-ups, then there's a question of Chassidus, and then there's the essays. So let's do a few follow-ups. One is about shidduchim. We were talking how much to reveal about a family and a family member. So in the previous 2 episodes, I discussed, firstly, how much if you're going on a match, what should you be saying, at what stage do you have to say before you start dating, middle, and so on. Last week we discussed, and what do you have to say about the parents or the family members of a shidduch? Do you have to speak about that as well? We discussed that. And here is a third part to that. And the question is, you discuss what the person dating and that person's family should or should not be revealing before the date. How about a third party being consulted? What obligations do they have in divulging compromising details about a potential shidduch? So we're not talking about the person going on the shidduch or their family. But someone calls you up and says, this and this name, they say they gave you as a reference, or you know them, or your family member, or you know them as a friend. What obligation do you have to share? What should you say, what should you not say? So it's a very good question, very much consistent to this discussion. And I would say the general principles are the same, except with a major caveat. When it comes to the person themselves that's dating, and they have an issue that should be shared, so we discussed when you should share it. But if you're not that person, then why are you, who's giving you the obligation, and why do you feel the responsibility that you have to share something? The person who's going on the date is the one that's going to share it, and should share it. That could be the argument. On the other hand, which means that if you know of a stumbling block, that someone's asking you about a certain person and it could affect their lives, you have an obligation to not mislead them. That itself, there's different halachas. There's one thing of telling them something false. Another is not telling them something that's real. So this I would again put into the category that you cannot have a black and white response to that. It depends what we're talking about. If you know about the person something that is really terrible, so maybe there's ways to say that you don't have to say it literally, but you could hint enough the person knows that they better look deeper into this, or may even be necessary to actually state it. And I think case by case, because we have to know what are we talking about. If you're saying you were in yeshiva with a person, and from time to time that person was a little depressed, is that something you have to share? Maybe not. Who says it's going to affect their life? Who says it's a serious thing? Who says the person still has that? Whereas if you know something else about the person that can be extremely compromising, and you know it's going to affect their future, so there's ways you could either say it directly or indirectly, but I would always check with a Rav or with a Mashpia to know whether you're just overreacting. Maybe you should say nothing. Maybe you should just hint and say enough that the person knows they should look into it some more. Or maybe you should say overtly, directly, exactly what it is. And I cannot give an answer without knowing what we're dealing with here. But it's a little different than when you're talking to the person himself, the parties in the shidduchim involved, because there they have far more obligation. Because you could always say, you know what, I don't know the person, I'm out of here. The fact of the matter is, a lot of people complain, they call about shidduchim references, they say references, yeah, the reference you gave are not going to tell me really what's about that person. I mean, I deal with this a lot, people call me. So if I know something that I find is going to be a problem, maybe a problem, very often what I'll say is I won't be very enthusiastic, I won't be negative, because it's not necessarily my job, and I don't know all the circumstances, but I'll say you should look into it some more, talk to these people who know the person. You know, and you have to be wise in how to do this. You don't want to mislead, but you also don't want to overstate things. That's why it's not really easy to answer, because you need to know exactly what we're dealing with here. Then, of course, in a situation like my own or others, if they're coming to you as a mashpia or even as a therapist, can a therapist expose something that is a confidentiality? So again, this is a big question. We know what it is in the secular world. In the Torah world, there's also questions what you can and cannot do. If you're in that professional person swore you to secrecy, or you know there's a confidential element, so you could then say, you know what, I know that person on that level, and I'm not the person to ask. That doesn't mean I'm not saying there is a problem, I'm not saying there isn't. I'm just saying you have to talk to others. And there's many ways to deal and address this. Okay. Someone else wrote about this literally today. How much to reveal about a shidduch? Friends put other friends' names down as references. I personally will never say something bad about that person because I feel they will find out something negative. It shouldn't come from a reference, but from doing better research, asking random classmates. In short, I feel references are only to say good things. Are my feelings correct? So I just addressed it. The feelings are correct generally, I would agree. The problem is when you have something very serious. Very serious. Serious person was in prison. A person is known to have done things that really, and you do not know that they're out of the woods, they did something really bad. So here are situations that you need to just say nothing is a responsibility as well. To say everything is also a responsibility. That's why I hesitate to give a black and white answer. I know people like black and white answers, I just cannot give one and wouldn't be responsible to do that. And I don't want, none of you in that situation, meaning you're the date, would like someone to say things about you, even though people say, if I want to have the information, I want the information. But would you want everything about you that someone happens to know to share when some things may not be that significant, or some things you've already worked through, etc.? That's why it's very important to be very wise, sensitive, responsible. I'm not talking about being reckless here, and take case by case by case. I'm more than happy if anybody has any questions on this matter, speak to me privately, right? You can email me, you can call me at, you can email me at go to meaningfullife.com/mylife, and just in the anonymous box where you can submit your questions, just add your email address or your phone number, and we will respond to you, and I can communicate to you if you want. You can consult with others as well. But these are serious things that need to be addressed. And I say again, I find that most situations are not that emergency that you must share everything. And that's not because we're trying to hold back. We're trying to understand that human beings are not perfect. And you start, I've seen this in many situations where you ask friends, and friends have their own little competitiveness, and they said things about their friends which were not flattering, and actually undermined a shidduch that could have been a shidduch. And when I heard about it, I said, this person said something, which I know that person. It was not, they had their own little issues with that person in yeshiva. So sometimes it's good to hear from friends, but you have to always take things with a grain of salt, because people can exaggerate, and if they're immature, say things that others will take the wrong way. They'll say, oh, that. You have to know what is an issue, what is not an issue. It's not a simple matter when it comes to these issues of shidduchim. And I've unfortunately seen shidduchim that were undermined that could have been beautiful shidduchim. I can't say, everything's ashgacha pratis. And it's important to really address and respect the boundaries, as well as address, because you could also have the other way around. Not saying something can cause, but you're generally not saying something. And remember, the person still is dating that person, and that they responsibly will probably bring it up. But you could always be concerned, they may not bring it up. So I've seen situations where sometimes the third party says, you know what, if they bring it up in the date, great. If they don't, I can always tell them later that you should look into this. So there's a lot of ways to maneuver in this important, vital issue in our lives. Okay. Because we're running late, I'm going to do the other follow-ups the following weeks. Right? I'm going to go to the Chassidus question. Let's go to the Chassidus question. Chassidus question is, so first of all, there was a comment on the Chassidus question of 2 weeks ago, episode 235, where I spoke about the Torah Dibra Masel Elatel Yitzchak. So the one who asked the question wrote to me, thanks Rabbi Jacobs for referring me to learning Torah Chaim to understand this Maimer in Torah a new light, Mosuk Midvash, sweeter than honey. Good, I'm glad you learned it and it helped. Here's the question for this week. How does Chassidus explain the dislocation of Jacob's hip socket in yesterday's parsha? And what is its practical application in our lives? Okay, so I actually wrote about this, and I've spoken about it a number of times, from the Maimorim of Chassidus based on Kabbalah and so on, because it's definitely a mysterious parsha. Yaakov ends up alone on the other side of the river. He meets this mysterious man, which we later find out, or we learn and discover, is the angel of Esav. They wrestle all night. When the man, this angel, this mysterious man, sees he cannot conquer him, he dislocates his hip socket, Gid Hanosha. He wounds him. He wants to leave. Yaakov doesn't let him leave until he blesses him, and he turns his name from Yaakov. He gives him the name Yisrael, the primary name of Eden till this day. And it says Al Kain, and that's why Lo Yechlu Bnei Yisrael, Jews till this day Ad Yom Hazeh don't eat from Gid Hanosha, because the sciatic nerve or the tendon in that area of the hip socket was severed or was injured by the angel. That's why we don't eat. Okay. So what is this? What's going on exactly? What is this? So the wrestle we know is the wrestle between two nations that began in the mother's womb, in Rivka's womb. Malum Yamatz. Two nations are inside of you and they're battling. So they're both archetypes. Even Al Pi Pshat, this now doesn't need any interpretation. Yaakov and Esau, twins, two nations, two archetypes. Kishazeh come and this one rise, this one will fall. Generally understood, that's the two nations of Malchus Edom, Esau's Zehu Edom, and Eden, the Jewish people, with the Western Roman Christian world. That till this day we're in golus Edom. The main golus in the Western world is golus Edom, which is the golus of Esau. And Yisrael, Yaakov, so there's a wrestling going on. So the wrestle they had then was a wrestle that would be one for generations to come. But Esau cannot prevail, the angel of Esau cannot prevail, because they didn't have kayach and strength. As the Zohar says, the Yaakov's strength of his mechin and his midas was very powerful, but he looks for a vulnerable spot. What's a vulnerable spot? The hip socket. That connects Chabad Chagas to Nihi. Netzach are the thighs, the hips. What's the disconnection? The disconnection, Aveda, the Zohar says, based on the Zohar, Chassidus explains, is that you could be very strong in mechin and midas, but if your actions are just mechanical and they're severed or somewhat disconnected, that's where Esau has a power to somewhat wound the person in their weaker spot. So we have to make sure, the Aveda is to make sure that our actions, Netzach and Heid, you saw, that part of the person is strongly connected. And we will heal, because this night indicates that night, Yaakov heals, and indicates the night of golus, where we get wounded, as the Ramban says, something from Medrash very strong, that every wound of Jews throughout history, every time they were oppressed, every time they were killed, they were in any way wounded, it all originates in the wound of the hip socket of Malach of Esav, of Yaakov. But we will ultimately, as the Medrash also says, this night of golus will end, like the night ended there, and the morning will come, and Yisrael will emerge. Yisrael kisarisu elikim v'anoshim v'tucha. Because you vanquished, and you won even a malach of Elikim. So you have the power to be stronger than anything. But golus does take its toll. There is the wound, the limp. But we can transcend it. Now there's more that's said on this, and I'll just share maybe another one point or two. And if you go to meaningfullife.com and search for the dislocated hip, beyond our wounds and limps, you'll find an article I wrote about this that has what I'm discussing in more detail. So he says, the Gemara in Chulin has a disagreement, two opinions, whether which hip socket, which thigh was the wound, the right side or the left side. Sometimes it says one side and the other. So Chassidus explains, and this is based on the Pardes, gate Shar Yud Zayin called Kaf Yerech Yankiv. And the Arizal and Taimiyah Mitzvahs on this week's Parsha, Vayishlach, explained in Sidrim Dach 304d and Derech Mitzvah, the Mitzvah of Gid HaNosha, that Netzach and Heid is the two levels of Aveda of Netzach and determination. Heid is acknowledgement, humility. The Maimer Tofrei Samach Tes and Tovshin Tes Pesach Mamorim, it's explained there that Netzach and Heid Aveda is Edem and Yishmael, the two final golus. And Aveda means that today we don't have all the Giluim I mentioned before with the miracles. But Netzach and Heid can be expected from everyone. Determination, like we learned in Basel Ligani, the shared determination, Midas and Netzachim, to prevail over anything. And Heid, follow orders. Even if you don't feel it, even if you're not on that highest level. That strength strengthens the hips and corrects, and the wound, heals the wound that Esav affected Yaakov in. Okay, as I said, there's more on this topic, and you can look it up. There's one more point, but because of time, I'll talk about it. Maybe I'll just add next week a little more. But you know what? I'll just share it already, since it's a Geschmack of Wort. The Zohar says, actually the Zohar even hints that this all happened, the war, the battle, the wrestling, the night of Yom Kippur. The Zohar says, Chelik Aleph, Kuf Ayin Beis 170b, that the pasuk Al Kain Leyechlu Yisrael as Gidanasha. What's S? Should have said Gidanasha. It says S is Rosh Hashanah Tisha B'Av. That what? Because of the displacement of the hip by Esav, which refers to the Churban Beis Hamikdash by the Romans, children of Esav, Magdil Zuremi, as the last Rashi in Vayeishev says, Al Kain, that's why La Yechlu, the Yidden don't eat on Tisha B'Av, because of that Churban Beis Hamikdash, because that is a manifestation of the wound. The Akedus Yitzchak on the Pasha adds that even the word Gid is Gimel, is the third day of Tishrei, hinting to Shem Gedalia. Yud is Asara B'Tevis, the 10th of Tevis. Dalet is the 4th month of Tammuz, the 4th from Nisan. And Gid is Gematria 17, so it's the 17th of Tammuz. So Al Kain Lo Yechlu Yisrael, S on Tisha B'Av, and Gid, those these 4 days, Hanosha is also the letters Hashana. In the year, the 4 days, the 4 fasts that are connected to the displacement of the hip, which manifested in the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So you can see how one pasuk captures so much, and the relevance to our personal lives, how we counter and heal from that wound. Okay. Someone also wrote that I read your article on Jacob's hip. I'm experiencing this issue. I'm now seeing it very differently. This doesn't make it easy, but gives it purpose, which actually does lessen the frustration. Thank you. Let's go to the essays. 3 essays. The first one is A Journey Out of Depression by Leah Piekarski, age 18, Brooklyn, New York, student, Benos Chamesh Academy. Depression has always been a constant problem in our society. As we continuously modernize ourselves and evolve, so does depression spread. And it goes on to analyze depression, talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, the different approaches that the world takes. But the bottom line is how Chassidus addresses it. In a personal way, she applies it, and how she personally got through it through her own Jewish experiences in Israel. So a very personal essay, touching, and what I would say, what's weak on is really the Chassidic sources, but still worthwhile reading. As I said, every person's journey is a journey worth following and worth respecting. So I thank you and respect the fact that you wrote this personal essay. The next is The Answer Within by Shmulik Fogelman, age 25, Worcester, Massachusetts, Shliach Chabad of UMass Medical School. How to deal with life's decisions, dilemmas, and challenges. Based on the concepts explained in Chassidus, on B'Shvili Nivra Elam, Hashem Mitzadi Gover Kenanu, and Tevis Chedesh Shaguf Nena Min Haguf. And basically applies these principles to the idea of the challenges in life, using the Gemara, the Mishnah Sanhedrin, that B'Shvili Nivra Elam, that the world was created for you, and how you have to live up to your personal destiny, like Zusha, the story with the Zusha. Very concise, but sharp essay, and well done as well. And finally, essay number 3 this week, Identity-Driven Circumstances, Shmuel Shuchat, age 32, Montreal, Canada, Shliach in Beth Chabad, CSL. Many of us have at one point challenged ourselves to achieve a life-defining goal. A majority have reached the point of creating a plan to achieve that goal. Some of us have even followed that plan for a time. But how many of us have actually achieved our goals? Through the prism of a fascinating talk given by the Lubavitcher Rebbe on the Rambam, this essay will offer a different yet more effective method for becoming who we would like to be. Based on the Sikha of the Rebbe, the Rambam talks about the 3 steps necessary for Gir, for conversion, and then applies it to our personal lives. And that's what this essay does, translates it in a nice way, those 3 steps that can help a person overcome their own challenges as they grow and their own metamorphosis in life. Okay. All these essays, the new ones as they're posted, can be found at meaningfullife.com/mylife. That's where you find all the archives, find also the essays, and also the forum where you can submit your questions and comments and so on completely anonymously. I'll also always add that we really depend on your sponsorships and dedications to continue this program and make it expand in different ways, which we're working on. So please consider a dedication in memory of a loved one or in honor of a loved one, especially as we go now to the days of Yutas Kislev, Chag HaGeula, And then from that right into Chanukah, illuminating the darkness with the light of what? Of Shemen, Pnimius HaTeira. The connection with the Shemen, the Pnimius, that it's hidden in the olive. But when you squeeze the olive, it comes out in a more powerful way, as we discussed earlier. So everyone should have a good yontif, a freilichen yutas Kislev, l'shana teva tikosev, yichosem, b'limud Chassidus, or b'darkei Chassidus. Sometimes it says b'limud b'teres Chassidus, b'darkei Chassidus, tikosev v'chosemu, in a year that is filled and saturated with Chassidus, that right away connecting it to your futzim and sachachutza that will bring osim mardal malka Mashiach. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Chassidus, my life, Chassidus applied. Everyone have a freilichen yutas Kislev and a freilichen Chanukah and a freilichen Tamid. Be well.